Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. So I'm really honored to be with all of you. I heard about this and I made the intention I wanted to be here, and then it just so happened I was going to be here after anyway for another program. So it worked out really well. I heard a little bit about the discussions you guys have been having, and you're going to tell me about the cultural imperative. So I want this to be discussion oriented. I don't feel qualified to lecture on love. I don't know what would make someone an expert on love. It's like my dissertation is on love. No, but I will give some general insights. And Amanda was alluding to this transition between the cultural imperative and love, and I find that very interesting. So the cultural imperative, which you guys I'm sure really enjoyed, yes, you enjoyed it. That was the article that changed my life. Actually, I read it when I was living in Turkey at the time. I was in my junior and senior year of college. I've been kind of going through a very long journey within the Muslim community, trying to find my place and my voice and the spirit of what I would believe in, even theologically. I had left for a year. I was studying in Jordan. When I was studying in Jordan, this guy T.J. Winter. Have you guys heard of him? Have you done any contentions? No.
Not officially, no.
So he's actually probably, as Dr. Omar and T.J. Winter, Dr. Jackson, are academically my three points of reference, and you actually count a few other people in the four geniuses of my life. And T.J. Winter was in Turkey at the time when I was in Jordan. He wrote an article called Ramadan in Istanbul. And one of our friends just thought she's inshallah trying to make her way to Istanbul next. And when I read the article, I literally packed my bag, kind of impulsive in that way, and I ended up in Istanbul at the end of Ramadan. And I was supposed to be there for 3 days, so I brought a carry-on going back to Jordan. And I ended up living there for 8 months. And it just changed my life completely. That's where Coding Vision for actually started. And I spoke rock music, I found that. What I found in Istanbul was the performativity of the cultural imperative. This article, I saw it. I actually saw it before this article. I spent 6 months living the cultural imperative, seeing the Byzantine and Ottoman architecture interweaving into one another. I saw a place where faith was not a noun, but it was a verb, which is intuitively something I've been chasing for a very long time. A friend of ours, Dawood Wormsley, I had been with him once in Canada, and people, Dawood Wormsley is a very prominent musician, but whenever you're prominent, there's a lot of pressure that comes from that in the Muslim community. There's a lot of expectations, there's a lot of spotlight, but you also see the community in a lot of ways. And the community, actually, I think Muslim community is maybe a misnomer. You see the collection of Muslims, and there's a lot of good and there's a lot of challenges that come from that. And I had been with Dawood just a year before I went to Jordan and Turkey, and he had told me, I said, people are saying on Wikipedia, you never know who writes that on Wikipedia. He said, people are saying that you've left Islam or something. He kind of smiled. I said, you know me, I wouldn't ask that question to ask if you have. I just want to see if you're okay. And he said that I never became Muslim. I accepted the Quran. And what he meant by that was, I never made a shift in my identity. I made a shift in my verbal path to God. And that's how he viewed it. And he said that when I started writing these nasheed songs with Yusuf Islam and all these guys, people made me into something I wasn't. I was created. And he said that when people say I've left Islam, I've left their notion of faith. I never left my notion of faith. And he was still reading Quran and praying and fasting. So I was like, what notion of faith have you left? I don't even see it. And he said that deep in my heart, and this is before Dr. Jackson actually wrote an article about this 2 years later. He says, deep in my heart, I think of Islam more as a verb than a noun. And that's where it just really struck me. What are the consequences of Islam being a verb? Because a noun, Islam, can become an adjective, Islamic. But a verb can become an adverb. When I was studying Arabic in Jordan, I kept going back to that. I went to the actual Arabic. Islam is if'al, it's a masdar. A masdar is a verbal noun. It's like if you have the word running or runner. Islam grammatically is running, not runner. Running is a verbal noun. It's exactly the grammatical tense of Islam. What's the consequence of this? It's not just semantics. One, semantics are important. It's not just language. It's not just playing with words. If I say I am running, does that imply active motion or just an identity? Active motion. If I say I'm a runner, does it mean I'm running in this very moment? No. So if I say Islam, but I'm not Islaming right now, it's an identity. That's why this whole thing about hyphenated identities, American Muslims, it started to fall apart, the whole enterprise. Are we Muslim Americans or American Muslims? I'm like, wait a second. If Jefferson is not an American Christian or a Christian American, he's just an American. Because the word America holds the meaning of Christianity. Then American Muslims started to feel redundant. We say that America always had Muslims. We say Benjamin Franklin was asked, Mr. Franklin, which church are you part of? And he said, if I'm part of any church, I'm the only member in my church. We say Thomas Jefferson wrote his own Bible and he had problems with Trinity. We say that there were 20% of slaves that came to America were Muslim from the beginning. We say that John Locke was inspired by Muslim theology in all of his writings. We say all this on one side. We say that in the Virginia Statute of Religious Freedom, Thomas Jefferson said Mohammedans have to have a place in this country. We say another founding father was when he was asked, what if a Mohammedan became president of the United States? And he said if a Mohammedan was to be found, that's the word they used for Muslims, if a Mohammedan was to be found to be the greatest protector of religious freedom and civics and justice, he would have to become president of the country. That was the founding father. We say that Washington Irving in the 1840s wrote a 2-book seerah based on Spanish sources. And he wrote in the introduction of that book, and this was someone who was friends with Lincoln. This was someone that was friends with Ulysses S. Grant. This was someone that was born on the year of the Revolution. He wrote Sleepy Hollow, Rab Van Winkle. His seerah was published in every major publishing house, Putnam House, all the old publishing houses. And he wrote in the introduction, I must apologize before writing a book on Muhammad in the current age. Why? Because nothing can be added to the story that's not already widely known. Consider this a book for children. Yeah? We say all of that, but then we have to qualify American with Muslim, as if you have to add on something to America because it's not already there. So the problem, or our whole perspective, is that we call ourselves American Muslims. Because we are deep down, we have an issue with just calling ourselves American. And we don't realize that if someone is not an American Jew or an American Christian, then just by calling ourselves American Muslim, one, we've created Islam as an identity. Two, we've said that it's not intrinsically in the fiber of the soil. The fiber of the soil. Not in the blood, sweat, and tears of the trail of tears as the Native Americans pushed out of their home. Not in the complaint of Sitting Bull when he was a wounded knee. We feel like we have to add something because we are uncomfortable being here in the first place. And then on top of that, we make it into a noun. Dawood told me that it was years later that intellectually instability meant that this faith as a verb, one, is grammatically accurate, but two, it changes everything. Faith becomes something that cannot be defined very easily. Nouns, an identity is very easy to say someone is part of it or not based on their clothing. A runner, you can tell by their shoes if they're a runner. But there's a lot of different types of people that can go running. It's not an identity. It's not a cloak that we wore. I went back into history and I realized where it came from. And I'll connect this to where we're going now with love. I realized that it came from post-colonial movements that were trying to create a type of faith that would respond to British colonization. And there's a reason for that. I get it. If people are saying that, your culture is inferior and we're going to write articles showing that this and that, you'll want a type of faith that makes you feel different. But when that was imported into the US, we developed something called identity religion. Not necessarily a religion that takes you to heaven, but a religion that tells you who goes to hell. As Dr. Jackson said, look into our own sources. People say, go back to the sources. Let's go back to the sources. He says, and this is the book he wrote, an incredible book. It's based on a book by Ghazali. He wrote the introduction called Boundaries of Theological Tolerance in Islam. He said it used to be the more you learned about the faith, the wider the circle of heaven became. Because you realize all of the flexibility of our faith. Your cup of mercy was overflowing the more you read. There was a time where Muslim scholars were making sound theological arguments, like major arguments, for including the Zoroastrians as people of the book. And then people were responding, no, they're not. But why was that debate even happening? Because they wanted to widen the circle. There was a time where we used to refer to people who were not Muslim as people of the book, showing commonality, the spirit of Ja'far ibn Abi Talib when he stood in front of Najashi. And we use that language at interfaith gatherings. But in private, and even at interfaith gatherings, we use the term non-Muslim, defining someone by something they're not. It reflects the identity issue. If I went to a Jewish event and someone said, we'd like to welcome the non-Jews here, I would say, I'm not a non-Jew, I'm a Muslim, I respect you, there's nothing wrong with that. If you went to a group of kids who graduate from high school in an area where people don't graduate from high school, and the speaker said, we're so honored to welcome the non-college graduates, referring to high schoolers,
Why would you define someone by something they're not? It's because you live in a world of identity religion, a world of demarcation, where Sharia creates not a two-lined road that lets you go infinitely on both sides, but a four-sided box that you have to be stifled within. The whole paradigm is off. So it becomes a major issue. It becomes a major discussion topic. A discussion we're not having at the deepest levels. Islam does not become Islamic. You don't take a school and call it an Islamic school. And I was teaching at one of these, and they said, they called me chair of Islamic studies. And when I was interviewing for the job, they said, well, if you were the chair, what would you change? I said, the name of the school would be first. And they were kind of like, what? They got uneasy. A year later, I'd leave. And I said, the name of the masjid would be second. Because Islamic was in all of this. And they said, what's wrong with the word Islamic? I said, well, one, there's 1,000 things wrong, but it starts with the identity thing. Nouns become adjectives. They didn't get that part. And then I said, okay, here, let's take this in a very simple level. If you have a school, and it's a Muslim school, and it's dysfunctional, it's okay. We're Muslims. We're trying our best. And yes, we do have a few dysfunctional Islamic schools, so-called Islamic schools. Quite a few. I've taught at a few of them. And we wish them the best, and I tried to help out a little bit. But if it's dysfunctional, Muslims are fallible. It's okay if it's Muslim school. It's not really okay. We should be doing a lot better. But if it's an Islamic school, and you've used your religion as an adjective to describe it, what looks bad when it's dysfunctional? Islam itself. When you have a political party and you call it the Islamic Party, and you happen to disagree with that political party, then why do you think there's such an extreme between either you're part of the Islamic Party or you're a secular, cultural, non-religious Arab or Pakistani? Because you use Islam to define yourself. So if you disagree with who you are, then you're outside of Islam. Because we're Islamic, you must be non-Islamic. It's all political. It's all binary. It's all dichotomies. It's all fake. It's identity religion. It's noun-based faith. What the cultural imperative was saying, and to me, as I was reading and what I saw in Istanbul, I saw the whole cultural imperative in a single moment. And I'm being very honest here because I think, when you've been speaking as long as I have, sometimes I was talking to kids about this earlier, it's very easy to become non-authentic. It's very easy to give speeches just because you've given 1,000 before, which I have. And you start saying lines that you know will work on the crowd. And you start saying things the community will like. And we don't have the real discussion oftentimes. Because as speakers, you become more concerned with YouTube likes and Facebook likes than actually having authentic dialogue. And authentic dialogue oftentimes makes you non-popular. And I've seen that in my life. I've played the crowd. And I've had these discussions and people get uncomfortable. But it's only through discomfort that growth comes. The Constitution required the anti-federalists and the federalists to have tension. Our Ummah required Umar and Abu Bakr to always be seeing it from two different sides. Umar was like Malcolm. Abu Bakr was like Martin. And then when Abu Bakr passed, Umar became Martin and Malcolm. But that creative tension, the Beatles, you need John Lennon and Paul McCartney. You need Mick Jagger and Keith Richards. And when one of them is without the other, there's no creative tension. Our community is a bunch of federalists without anti-federalists. There's not that creative tension and critical discourse. When I was in Istanbul, I was standing next to the Suleymaniye Masjid, which is the crown jewel of Istanbul, not the Blue Mosque, which is more the tourist jewel of Istanbul, which is also a beautiful mosque. But I was standing next to the Suleymaniye. This was like the Oxford of the Ottoman Empire, and built by Suleiman the Magnificent. And I was standing there. No, it's actually not. It wasn't Suleymaniye. It was the Fateh Mosque. That's where I was living, in the Fateh Mosque, which is named after Muhammad Fateh, the conqueror of Istanbul. And there's this lady, and I'm describing this just to make a point. I was like 20 years old. I was kind of getting out the whole Muslim activism scene, very involved with Minna and MSA and leadership and speeches and conferences. So a lot of that stuff has benefit. A lot of stuff is also played out a little bit in extremes. But I was standing there next to the mosque, and I see this lady in a knee skirt. I'm mentioning it in detail to make a point. She was wearing a knee skirt. Her shirt was like this, cut like this. And in my American identity-based faith, I made 1,000 judgments. And it was extremely subconscious. I would never even admit it at the time. If someone asked me, I would say, no, faith doesn't have a uniform, and it's in the heart, and it's esoteric. I would say all the right answers. But no, in my mind, I was like, liberal Muslim. I'm in Turkey, liberal. She's a liberal. Okay. So I made that kind of very subconscious thing as I was walking. And it was like Allah wanted to really shake me up. She walks by the mosque, and in the mosque they have there's a graveyard, and they have all the scholars and people who have passed away and the different caliphs. And it seemed like it was her routine. She was with her child. They walk, they stop outside the graveyard, and they both put up their hands. And I just stopped. I was walking by. I didn't make dua or anything. I wasn't even conscious of the idea that those graves were people. Like, it's just part of my lifestyle walking past. And they make like literally like a 10-minute prayer in Turkish. And I just stood there. And then she goes like this and she keeps walking. It wasn't a conference. There was no registration fee associated. There was no marketing material that got her there. Her faith was not a special event. It wasn't an institution. There were no t-shirts that went along with it. There was no hyped up Facebook page. There was no really cool, savvy, YouTube trailer that got her there. It was lifestyle. It was culture. It was intertwined in her life. In Eid time, they had these like puppet shows, and it was life itself. A month or two after that, I read The Cultural Imperative, and I got it. It's like I had the language for what I had already heard. I had the conscious thought for the unconscious. I had the text for the context that I had already seen. And then it all clicked. And I started Poetic Vision Tour. And people would come to our shows, and I'm not saying this because those of you who know me, like Khalil, knows how silly this is. I'm only saying this for, recording. Good thing I dropped it. I'm saying this to make a point, not because I am this person, because I'm not. I was at Dayton, Ohio, and someone came to the concert. And they said, you used to be a speaker, because I didn't speak for years after that. I was writing music and performing. And they said, you used to be like a little Tariq Ramadan, and now you're like this little, like, I don't know, he said some Elvis or something. I was like, man, that's a huge compliment. I'd rather be Elvis than Tariq Ramadan, to be honest. But what he meant, and I'm neither of those. I'm not even a very good songwriter or a very good speaker, but what he meant by that was that you were doing something substantial, and now look at you're doing this frivolous, like, as they call it at our events, entertainment. I remember the first time I hosted ISNA, which was also probably the last, because I started off by critiquing. It was the second last. They probably didn't watch the video till next year. I started off by saying this is entertainment. That's bread and circus. That's what Caesar would do to keep the Romans distracted. Entertainment? Are you not entertained? Are you kidding me? It's enlightenment, not entertainment. But it was this perspective, and when I went back and back, I was like, how did we get to this place? Where sometimes it got to the point, and I know this I don't know if this is out of bounds, I don't know if I'm going too far with this, but it got to the point where, when you read about the nation, I actually have a huge affinity to the nation, even some aspects of Elijah. There was times where I would read about the nation, I'd be like, they're using the word Allah and Islam, but it's just, the only similarity I have with them is the same names. It's like we both use the word Allah, we both use the word Islam, but we're talking about two different things. In my early years of reading about the nation, I got to a point where I started going to Jummah khutbahs, and I was at the same exact point. I was like, the people I have connected to, I've been an activist for since I was 12. Like, I literally didn't have a childhood, never had summer break, spent years in Jordan and Turkey and Mina and president this and vice president this and MSA this and Fasna this and speaker this. I share only the name, Muslim, Allah, and the labels. The essence has changed. So I went back to Dawood and I said, okay, I'm where you're at. And he said, what occurs to me is either I'm right and everyone else is wrong, which would make me arrogant, or I'm wrong and everyone else is right, which makes me ignorant. That's what Dawood told me. Dawood is also quite a genius in certain ways. And he said that I'm right now between arrogance and ignorance. Because either, I literally believe that I'm the only one who has this new idea, and every Muslim is just totally off in America. Or I believe that I'm just delusion and everyone else is right. And then when he said that, I don't know why it just came to my lips. I said, غَيْرَ مَغْضُوبِ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا الضَّالِّينَ. Basically, the one God is angry with, protect us from them. That's people who are arrogant, and people dalin are people who are ignorant. I'm like, man, we're in some bad company now. But then, thank God, literally thank God, T.J. Winter came, Dr. Jackson came, Dr. Umar came. And they wrote what we were thinking. They said there's been a major shift in this country. Major shift in the West. They gave us historical precedent for why it happened. We became reactionary. We built a faith that would be able to rebut England, would be able to rebut France, rebut the Dutch, but it would not be able to let us transcend beyond ourselves. Sheikh Hamza came and said, we built a faith that told you have to worry about where your hands are in prayer, but not where your heart is in prayer. And then anyone that said otherwise, we labeled them a Sufi and these mystical, bid'ah people. And I realized I would never be able to be part of a group. But I realized that I had been told a false narrative. And it worked for a while. It inspired me. And it would have been very difficult if I didn't have enough context. I would have gotten depressed. I would have gotten disheartened. I'm like, what is this Islam I believe in? But then I got a deeper connection. And I'm not a scholar or anything. It's one of those like jack of all trades, master of none type things where you know a little bit of a lot of things, but not a lot about nothing. But I was able to get a little bit of enough things that it gave me a new framework. And then I went around the world and I realized that framework existed in Indonesia and Malaysia and Sudan and everywhere else. And I was like, how in the world did we get here? That our flavors, it's really the word I use is flavor. Our flavor of this faith is so dramatically different than everywhere else. Sheikh Hamza, once we were in California with him, he said, we've successfully done something that has not been done for 1,000 years. We did in the last 100 years. We thought we were seeing something positive. And he says, we have successfully made Islam ugly. It will not, if it does not fulfill the emotional, intellectual, spiritual, personal, social needs of a people will not accept it. We've inherited from our forefathers, but that's what the Quraysh said. They said, why do you follow the idols? They said, Asatir al-Awwalin. We saw people before us doing it. Is that our logic for our faith? That's not going to be, and Dr. Umar told us this 10 years ago. He said, that will not be convincing to the next generation. So this cultural imperative meant a lot more to me than, like right now it's become like a really hip article. 8 years ago, no one even read it. I remember Dr. Umar was like this he wasn't even a good speaker like he is now. He wasn't as charismatic. He didn't have that whole like Gandalf thing going where everyone was like following him. And he's become that wizard figure. And I told him that. He came to Allentown, I told him, I said, you're a mythical wizard. I told him, you're Sitting Bull. You're not a Muslim scholar to me. And he's kind of like says, astaghfirullah, and just brush me off. But I do see it. I always imagine him saying, thou shalt not pass, and hitting his staff. He actually did that once with Habib Ali, and I believe it. Yeah, no, I told him that. I said, you're a wizard. I said, you're a mythical figure. I believe, no, I don't mean that. I don't mean that. And if you read the End of Times, and you read the miracles the Prophet did, I told the kids this. Science fiction becomes much more non-fiction. And a lot of the non-fiction we read becomes much more science fiction. There's no superhero that has a power that can go through the 7 heavens. Superman's got nothing on the Isra al-Miraj. So I mean this when I say this. Messiah's coming, there's going to be like shadow fighters. I mean, this is like, you could write a science fiction based on the End of Times that people would say is unrealistic, rewrite it. You know what I mean? And so what I'm saying is that, for me, the cultural imperative is not just we need more arts and liberal arts in our community. That we shouldn't have a perspective, if you don't become a doctor or engineer, you might as well die single with your cats. Yeah, that's a simplistic look at it, and that's important. I mean, and if I wasn't allergic to cats, I would. But what I'm saying is that, like, that's one way to look at it. Or you can say the cultural imperative is actually very different. Dr. Moore says in the cultural imperative, we're not social animals, we're not political animals, we're cultural animals. I mean, that's our definition. What does it mean to be cultural? We don't mean high culture. We don't mean just Beethoven. I mean, that stuff is good too. It means that this deen is about inhaling and exhaling. This is how we're going to get to love. This deen is about inhaling and exhaling. And for a lot of us, faith became stifling because we inhaled and we never exhaled. For a lot of us, oxygen, what does it turn into when you exhale? Carbon what?
Carbon monoxide.
Carbon monoxide. What happens? Dioxide. But what happens when you inhale and don't exhale?
Choke.
Exactly, but the oxygen that's life-giving does what?
Kills you.
It poisons you. Oxygen can poison. Water can drown. 70% of your body is water, so you can drown in it too. Yes, this faith will be life-giving. The tree of life can give you immortality. It can also make you leave the garden. This is good stuff. You know, I wrote this song about Snow White's dwarves climb to heaven. They bring her back baskets of religion that night. Those silly little bearded men they didn't know plucked a poison apple from the tree of life. You can be eating the wrong fruit and promising yourself some type of religious, spiritual, self-righteous immortality. It can be completely off the wrong Kool-Aid. Jim Jones. Cult. No, I'm serious. I'm serious. And there's a fine line between a spiritual transcendent path and an ideological cult that tells everyone else they're going to hell. I had a kid, I was at Princeton. You would think, these like academic, all the kids at the university are like, this whole group were Near East Studies majors. There's like 2 masters, 1 PhD. There were all these like academic Muslim kids. And a girl said to me very confidently, she's like, my only problem with Islam is that everyone that's not Muslim is going to hell. And she's like, I just don't understand how my Christian and Hindu friends are going to hell. I said, that's not true. And she's like, no, I'm just saying, I know there's some opinions that some other people go to heaven too, but obviously the majority scholarly opinion is that they're all going to hell. I said, that's not true. She's like, but well, majority. I'm like, no, it's nowhere in the deen. And then someone tried to quote some Quran things out of context. I'm like, dude, majority theological opinion in Islam, the majority Ashari, and half of the Maturidi opinion, is that if someone is not convinced that this faith is true, they are accountable for based on what they're convinced on. That's the majority opinion. It's not like me saying this. Abu Hanifa, Imam Ghazali, they all said it. People are not accountable for what they're not convinced of. And then someone says, but there's a hadith where Islam will enter every home. Yes, that could happen on their deathbed, so you don't even know if they died Christian then. So what are you talking about? But it was like this. And so what I started to realize was this cultural imperative wasn't just based on we need to build culture in America. It was also saying that our entire approach to faith had become very much like a gated community mentality, like a country club, where heaven was limited real estate, and we want to make sure that we keep it for our group. And God forbid the people from the inner city find their way up the metro and get into our heaven. We had this finite notion of heaven, and it became very, very difficult for us to live with other people because they made us uncomfortable. We didn't. So the cultural imperative then expands. The cultural imperative becomes a framework where when you have this framework, you can have in the exoteric, in the level of Islam and Sharia and Aqidah, you can have a very sound foundation of faith. And that actually is more, it's not a book, it's a bookshelf. It gives you a framework that allows you then to go into Native American spirituality and find goodness. You can go into Christianity without accepting the theology. This is not watered down Islam, we're all the same. No. You're able to take goodness from anyone. Like the Prophet ﷺ said, the lost camel is the believer. But it's not just like, the Christians say something and it's good because it coincides with the verse of the Quran. No. You can intrinsically benefit from other people based on their wisdom. The cultural imperative is not just arts. The cultural imperative is a lifestyle, which makes you not feel like a stranger in America because you don't live this hyphenated identity. My friend Kareem Salama, he was on Fox News and Sean Hannity, God bless him. But remember, Fox News has always existed. Abu Lahab has always been there. Abu Jahl has always been there. The thing is, for every Abu Lahab, there was an Abu Bakr. Now we have people who dress like Abu Bakr with the heart of Abu Lahab. So the issue is with us, it's not with them. We have to just keep that in mind. There's not enough Abdullah bin Masouds for the Abu Lahabs. That's the issue. That's the imbalance. But he was on Fox News and Sean Hannity was saying to him, "Oh, Kareem, you've come out with a new country album," and he's like, "How does it feel being a minority in America?" And he's like, "I'm not." And he's like, "Well, aren't you from Egypt?" He's like, "I was born in Oklahoma." He's like, "Oh, okay." And then he says to him, but he's like, "What does it, I mean, like a religious minority?" He's like, "I'm not a religious minority." He's like, "You're Muslim." He's like, "Muslim's not my identity, so it doesn't make me a minority." He's like, "Oh." And then he's like, it's like if vegetarians are considered minorities in America or something. It's a lifestyle. It's a verb. Anyway, so then he was like trying to get him, and he said, okay. He's like, and then out of the blue he asked this question. He's like, when 9/11 happened, and you could see Kareem's face, of course. No, but Kareem wasn't playing. Every other guy will go on there and start debating with these guys. Yeah. He didn't respond, because to respond is to accept the argument. Mm-hmm. He undermined the paradigm itself. Mm-hmm. He didn't accept their cognitive frame. He didn't accept their cognitive frame. Yeah. Mm-hmm. To respond, to become leftist, is to accept the right, to accept the center. Right. You have to refuse the question. So he said to him, after 9/11 happened, were you worried about Muslims? It seemed like he was being very empathetic, but he was trying to put him in the box of Islam. That's what, because he refused to go in that box. He's like, I was worried about the families of the firefighter and the people who died. Allah. Sean Hannity was done. Allah. No. And then he said, also your album is for everyone. He accepted it. He went into his because he didn't play. He didn't say, no, Muslims have also been hurt, and there were 300 Muslims that died in 9/11. He did not accept his frame. W.E.B. Du Bois in the Souls of Black Folk in 1942 or 1948 or something, he wrote, and W.E.B. Du Bois was one of the greatest African-American intellectuals, second African-American to graduate with a PhD from Harvard in sociology. He said in Souls of Black Folk, he said the black man, he said the word Negro, but he said the African-American in this country has been blessed and cursed with double consciousness. We must forever see ourselves through the lens of the other, and in doing so, will not develop self-consciousness. So I was with Sheikh Mendez. We were doing a show in Atlanta. It's actually where we met Sheikh Mendez. I mentioned this, and we talked about it afterwards. That I truly believe that after 9/11, Muslims embraced double consciousness head on. We defined ourselves based on a reaction to the other. It's very dangerous. I was talking to a friend of mine, Fadi Kiblai. He's very active with the Palestinian Solidarity Movement. We used to be part of it in the 90s or early 2000s together. I was telling him that we have to be very careful with the Palestinian movement. Not define self based on how others are viewing the Palestinian cause. It's very dangerous. And so cultural imperative is actually liberating. It says that we as a being, Islam is a verb, and because it's a verb, it's not a box. And because it's not a box, I'm trying to get to love, because it's not a box, okay? There's a West African scholar, Sheikh Ahmed, what's his name? The scholar, who was it? I don't think it was. It was someone else, right? Okay. So there's a West African scholar who said, thank you. There's a West African scholar who said that Islam, this whole Islam thing, because what I want to do is I want to change these words. If you know, I was talking to the kids about this. Hermeneutics says that words can have different meanings. If I say the word home, everyone can close their eyes and they'll get a different mental image. So home doesn't have one definition. Just because Webster tells you a definition, the definition of a word is the feeling that flows into your heart and the image that's painted into your mind, not a definition. So if the word Islam loses meaning, it doesn't matter how many halakas we have. If all the words have lost meaning, what will more words do? Because discussions are based on words. And if the word Medina has lost its flavor to us, then no matter how many times we use the word Medina, we won't see the transformation we're looking for. Because sentences and discussions are just a collection of words. And the words have to be reinstilled with their meaning. That's why we're having this discussion. Because we can't even talk until we get the words right. That's why the Prophet ﷺ was such a master on words. He cared about words. People can tell if a hadith is right or wrong without even knowing if it's right or wrong if one word is used slightly inaccurately. One of the scholars, he taught his son 40,000 invalid hadith and didn't tell him it was invalid. He made him memorize them, and then he said these are all wrong. And the kid was like, what the heck? He spent 5 years memorizing or something. And he said, if I taught you 400,000 correct hadith and you saw hadith, you wouldn't know if it's correct or not. But if I taught you only the 40,000 fabricated hadith, whenever you hear a hadith, you'll know if it's right or wrong. He created a flavor. He gave him a sensibility. And language was so sensitive in that way. Language was so sensitive. And we use Islam very lightly. Islam is a way of life. All these bumper stickers that are actually problematic if you think about them long enough. But they're just put into our cars, into our minds. And we drive around with them, both vehicles. The vehicle of the intellect, the vehicle car. And we don't think about what it means. This great West African scholar, he said, Islam, there's 3 types of Muslims. He says, first, there's a solid Muslim, a liquid Muslim, lastly a gaseous Muslim, a gas Muslim. One of the 3. Now, part of our issue is, when I was growing up, I was told the Quran was, I was told that I'm a computer. This is what happens when you don't have enough liberal artists in the community. I was told I'm a computer and the Quran is a user's manual. T.J. Winter said the Quran shows, it doesn't tell, which is complete opposite. It's a treasure map for a grand adventure. It's not a user's manual for a computer. For God's sake, this is why you need career diversification. There was actually greater career diversification in pre-modern Medina than us. We were talking about this, the Paleolithic age, Neolithic age. We had greater career diversification in Musa alayhi salam's time. It's like the community, we have surplus and we don't have career diversification. Like we are like almost proofs against evolutionary biology. It's survival of the fittest. How the heck are we still alive?
There's 1.6 billion of us, that's why.
Maybe. Moth on an ocean, right? We were told this would happen. And to be positive though, the positive is we can do the opposite. We can change that. So the scholar said you can be solid, liquid, or gas. Just like I was told the Quran was a user manual and I was a computer, which was, no wonder we have robotic faith if we're being told we're computers. So right around the time Terminator came out, it was a really nice time in my life. Soon afterwards, I was told that you have to be a solid Muslim. Of course you have to be a solid Muslim if you're going to define yourself as different than the other. Solid. I was told that was ideal, to be solid. Now, if it means being firm, okay. Being firm in your faith and convictions. But we weren't supposed to be solid. You know, they say, what's the thing about if the roots are strong, the branches are what? You guys know?
Stronger, I'm guessing.
They're not stiff, they're supple. And if the roots are weak, the branches become stiff. So if you see a stiff person, their roots are weak, not the opposite. When someone's roots are strong, you see them as very merciful. It doesn't mean that they don't have a strong foundation. It means they have a strong foundation. Because they're so confident, they don't have to be a jerk with you. But when you see an angry Muslim, I wrote a rap song about this actually when I used to write rap. They call him the thick man. He walks with a stick man, a real bone to pick man. That guy, he's just walking around like beating you with his miswak or whatever. The dude is unhappy about something. And he's going to burn out and be back at the club in a month. You know it. I've seen it my whole life. He's overcompensating for the fact that he doesn't believe. But you see someone who's being merciful. He's confident. He doesn't have to front. He doesn't have to put on some show. Because his show is in the middle of the night with his Lord. He doesn't need to do it with you. He doesn't need the spotlights because he has Allah's lights. He doesn't need to put a show in the masjid, that power trip. You have all these meek people going to the masjid that become monsters. They're trying to live out their political ambitions as if like back home. They want their little territory within their board seat. You don't become monsters in public and become angels in private. So you're better in private than you are in public, but both reflect a deep-rooted taqwa, consciousness. Why is it that we say, أَرَيْتَ الَّذِي يُكَذِّبُ بِالدِّينِ? Have you seen the one that's rejected the day of judgment? Has rejected the deen? Rejected the debt? Dain? What? It's the one who doesn't pray? No, it's actually the one who prays. فَوَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ. It's the one who doesn't feed the orphan. Our relationship with the horizontal realm is a proof of the vertical realm. It's not that if you don't feed the orphan, you're a Muslim, but you're not conscious. No. You rejected God. If you don't feed your neighbor, if you don't give something to your neighbor, if you don't feed the poor person. It's not this activism thing. Oh, I'm spiritual, but I'm not an activist. No. أَرَيْتَ الَّذِي يُكَذِّبُ بِالدِّينِ فَذَلِكَ الَّذِي يَدُعُ الْيَتِيمَ. If you neglect the orphan, you don't believe in the day of judgment, homie. You got no vertical side. It's not like you're good with the Lord and not with the people. You're not good with the people, you don't believe in the Lord. So this West African scholar said, there's 3 types of believers: the solid, liquid, and gas. And you could, if you want to go really deep into this, the solid represents Islam, the liquid represents Iman, and the gas represents Ihsan. So you start off with Islam. And Islam is, and I don't mean Islam as the whole faith. I'm talking about Islam, Iman, Ihsan. And this is where our definitions are so off. Anyways, so Islam is represented when you're praying and you're standing up. Okay? Because your mind is over your heart. It's the intellectual part of the deen. The 5 pillars. You learn about things. You learn about the Sharia. Sharia is represented there. The rules, the halal and haram. You're not supposed to stop there. That's just supposed to give you the 2 lines of the road so you can fly. Then you go to Iman. That's when you do ruku. So you go down and your heart and your mind are perfectly parallel to each other. And that's belief. Belief is the harmony between the intellect and the emotional center, which is the heart. And Ghazali said the heart is the king. The mind is the grand vizier. And since the 1700s and Enlightenment, we have made the mind the king. And that's why the world's in chaos. The mind is a king, and that's why when we were talking about this with the kids. If someone apathetic means you don't have feeling. So what's the opposite of apathetic? If you know etymology, you take the A out and you get the opposite. The opposite of someone who doesn't feel is pathetic. That's someone who feels. So why do we use that for someone that we should have pity for? We look down at the people who feel. Now, one of the other meanings of pathetic is someone you feel for. So maybe, but even if you feel for someone, why would you feel pity for them then? So why is the opposite of someone who doesn't feel, someone we should have pity on? Because feeling is looked down at. When people want to insult women, what do they say? Men are rational and women are irrational. They choose things based on their emotions. If anything, that's a compliment. Even though it's an oversimplification. Wow. If anything, that's a higher state. If anything, that's more emotional. If anything, if you told Abu Bakr that, he would kiss your forehead. And if you told him you're rational, you're not emotional, he would say, why is it that Umar is crying all night? Why is it that we quote the moments where Umar was going to cut someone's head off, but we don't quote the moments where his eyes were filled with tears? And that was the majority of his life. Between those 4 stories that we keep quoting. Because we bought into this idea that we want to be solid, these rigid people. You know what's the problem with solid? Imagine the metaphor of a lake. If you stay in Islam, just firm and solid, and you don't keep developing, it's like a lake that's frozen. Yes, it's solid. The problem with that is there's no depth. There's no deep sea diving faith. And all the wonders are underneath the ocean. And you don't even believe in that. Someone who's never been underneath the ocean, they say that nothing exists down there. You've never experienced it, homie. Don't deny what you haven't experienced. Your Islam is a recipe. And your recipe has not been baked, has not been tasted. So you can say it's really authentic, but you don't know what it feels like. You don't know what it tastes like. We gather recipes after our conferences. We write notes we don't read. And we have libraries full of recipes we've never cooked. And we debate with other people that our recipe is better than yours. But we ourselves have never tasted the recipe. That's Islam. It's just the ice. And then with spiritual purification, it becomes water. Water is interesting. It can bend, it can adjust. When it goes around the mountain and around the river bend, it can twist and turn. It stays itself though. We're not talking about diluting ourselves. It is water itself. It won't be diluted. It bends and it takes the form of any container you put it in, the cultural imperative. You go to China, you go to Morocco, you go to Turkey. It looks different in different places. But the substance is the same. We become water. And when we become water, you could take 1,000 torches of fire and throw it into a single lake. It will extinguish all of the fire. And it will never be burnt because it is water. We could take the fire of the world and extinguish it. Take 1,000 matches and throw it into a small puddle. A puddle. It will extinguish all 1,000 matches. It will not be changed. We become water. We become water for people around us. When people come to us with this angry energy, we don't fight fire with fire. We fight fire with water, as Sheikh Hamza said. When people hate us, it's like we forgot the seerah. We're the people, when people hate us, and then one day they don't hate on us, we go check in on them, make sure they're okay. That's the people we come from. And we want Bill O'Reilly to go to hell. This is not our deen. This is not Islam. You can claim something else. If Bill O'Reilly didn't do his show one day, we would actually go visit him and say, are you feeling okay? Because you didn't do the whatever factor, whatever you think he does. Mm-hmm. Right. This is our deen. If Rush Limbaugh didn't do his radio show one day, if Daniel Pipes, if all these fools, Emerson, if they didn't do their thing, we would go and check in on them and make sure they're okay. It's like, hey man. And the guy would say, wait, aren't you a Muslim? He's like, no, I just want to make sure you're okay. You weren't hating on us today. That's exactly what the Prophet ﷺ did repeatedly in the seerah. You become water. You extinguish the fires of the world. And then, so you start as solid. Then you go to liquid. And then you finally, but you're still terrestrial. You're still in the world. And then, with more purification, we become gas. And then we can fill any shape, we can move, but we can also transcend this world. Like Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu said, and many people don't even realize Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu wrote poetry. Because of how disconnected. We learned the seerah through military history. Mm-hmm. The Prophet ﷺ became the Prophet. People tortured him, sent his people to Abyssinia. He went on the Isra al-Miraj, the only spiritual thing we talk about. Did the Hijrah, then Battle of Badr, Battle of Uhud, Battle of Trench, Qaynuqa, Qurayza, Khaybar, conquered the Makkah, Battle of Hunayn, he passed away. So say what he is. He was a general who dabbled with prophetic mission in the Meccan period. No, it's a lie. This, in our seerah, is a completely different flavor. Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu said the believer is like a bird. And his body is a cage. Death is the opening of the cage so he can fly back to his Lord. Say the truth. Tell us that Hassan bin Thabit was the poet of the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ had two members in his masjid. One for his khutbahs and one for his poet. Say the truth because it's in there. And there's no denying it. It's in the seerah. That when people used to come from Makkah and say poetry against the Prophet ﷺ, he would turn to Hassan, he would stand up and just smash him. So it was like rap battles. And it was on. He had his own mimbar. No, there were two mimbars. One was for the spiritual talk, one was for the poetry. Now, when we can make the journey from solid to liquid to gas, what will we have to do? I said gas is ihsan. It's when you do sujood and the heart rises. This is not Sufism, it's not Salafism, it's not labels. I'm done with all that. I don't belong to a group. We take wisdom. If we can take wisdom from Native Americans, we can't take wisdom from Muslims who have a different label than us. Imam Siraj Wahaj, there's no Imam Siraj, right? Mm-hmm. Imam Siraj Wahaj was on his deathbed. Alhamdulillah, he got better. We actually thought we were going to lose him. Mm. And he couldn't afford, this man raised millions of dollars for the whole country, for every masjid. I once asked him when he was in India, and I said, we haven't seen you in a while. He's like, I've been around, I just haven't been around where you're around. I'm like, where have you been around? He's like, man, I've been spending 20 years raising money for chandeliers for suburban mosques. And our mosque didn't have roofs over their head. That's where I've been. I'm like, oh. So when he was sick and almost dying, one, he didn't have health care. Two, he didn't have a car. So someone had to take him. He never had a car. People used to pick him up and take him to Masjid Taqwa in Brooklyn. This guy's a legend. When he was he thought he was going to die. I heard his speech, the first speech he gave once he got better. And he said in that speech, he said, there was a moment where I was lying in my deathbed, and I thought I was going. And he said, in that moment, two thoughts came to my mind. It's It's a really random two thoughts. I mean, you wouldn't think of it, that's what he's thinking. He said, first of all, I'd always told myself that a courageous thing for a man to do is always speak the truth when he thinks something is true. Never to be quiet. He's like, the thought that came to my mind is, what about the story of Yusuf? When his father told him, don't tell your brothers about your dream. He's like, that's when in that moment, when I'm about to die, he thought he was about to die, he thought to himself, there is wisdom in being quiet at times. That was one wisdom. The other, crazy, how did that come to your mind? And the second wisdom, like, this is when I thought I was literally going to go. He said, because you think you see a light and all this. He said, I saw two men walking into a grocery store. He must have been hungry. No, he wasn't hungry. He said, and this was a metaphor, that it came to his mind as he thought he was going to leave the world. And he said that I promised myself that if I live, I'm going to teach people this. That's why he told it in the first speech after he got out of the hospital. He said one person goes in, and the first person that goes in, they buy everything based on the brand name. So Kraft macaroni and cheese, Dannon yogurt, whatever. The second person goes in, and they don't look at the names at all. They look at the ingredients. They turn to the back and they read the ingredients. They purchase things based on ingredients. And he's like, an insight came to my heart that what would happen if people stopped treating other people based on labels and brand names, and we were to look into the ingredients of each other's souls. So when we make the journey from solid liquid to gas, faith becomes it becomes breezy. It becomes like a zephyr that's sending us back to our Lord, like the Persian poem by Attar, The Conference of the Birds, where the birds have to travel up to the master, and they're burning through the atmosphere and falling down, and a few birds, their feathers have been burned. They finally get to the master, and they look at the throne room. They get into the throne room, they look at the throne's empty, and then they're told that the master had been with them the whole journey. Faith becomes transcendent. It's not some flimsy, non-deen, Quran and Sunnah. We start looking at the Quran and Sunnah completely differently. We start seeing it as this treasure map of this great adventure. We start seeing Islam as a journey, not the destination. And then we understand إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, that deeds are judged by intentions. As one of the interpretations of that, or deeds are only intentions. We only care about the intentions. We don't care about the deed or the reaction to the deed. We don't care about results. We become people of principle and intentions. We don't chase results, whether it's a grade, a wife, or a salary. We don't care about results. Or we don't want the result of Islam to be the fastest growing religion in the world. We don't become it. Islam doesn't become Bani Islam, as Sheikh Hamza said. The Prophet ﷺ came to get rid of tribes, not to create another tribe. Islam doesn't become Islamism, another communism or capitalism, another ideology that must flourish. We need more numbers. We don't create a cold war with every other religion. We just want to be number one. We have a much more elegant, spiritual, real Quran and Sunnah approach to our faith. When that happens, the head, for the first time in our life, will submit. As Iqbal, the great Indian Pakistani poet said, how many people have done prostration their whole lives and their minds have never prostrated to their Lord? We don't prostrate to people. We don't intellectually subjugate just because a scholar is a scholar. No, we respect scholars, but we don't do that. But to God, we do. We do. If we know something is from God, we do. It doesn't mean there's no critical thinking in our faith. No. It doesn't mean that there's no intellectual apparatus in our faith. There is. But there is a time where the mind has to hit the ground. When we know something is from God, and we still don't feel comfortable, to have the humility to do it, and say that maybe someday I'll understand. And when our mind hits the ground and our heart lifts up, but then it doesn't stay there. How beautiful prayer is. Because then you have to stand back up, and the mind has to go back up, and the heart has to go down. It's balance. But when the mind comes up now, it's like if you take a cup. This is like perfectly set up. And the heart is up here, right? So what happens when you do sujood? The heart starts influencing the mind. So when the mind comes back up, it has all these insights from the heart, and it can be a better advisor. But then it bends down, and it creates a relationship of iman, and then ihsan, the cup is full now, and sujood, it fills up the mind again. And then the mind comes up enlightened. With every cycle of prayer, the mind is being renewed by the heart. And then the mind becomes on top. It can advise the heart with its new intellect. And then it can bounce again, and they can pour again. That level of sophistication is very different from saying that, you have to pray like this and this and this. That legalistic approach to faith is not going to help us transcend. It's not going to help us feel anything. It's going to be orthopraxy, where everyone just does the same thing. It's just about uniformity. And when the heart comes up, then we can talk about love. And we can even have this discussion if we're going to have this month. The cultural imperative is deeply connected to love. When the heart is once again the king, what happens is, one, this profound mercy. Look at the Prophet's life. He was making dua for the hypocrites until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him not to. Why? And he said, if I could do it one more time and it would work, I would have done it. That sounds very different than calling people kuffar that you don't even know who they are. Sheikh Hamza Yusuf said, kuffar. What's kuffar? Kafir. What's kafir? Before the Prophet ﷺ came in, the word for kafir in Arabia was the word for a farmer. If you call someone a kafir, they're like, hey man, what the heck? No, it was a farmer. It was what they did. Right. Why? Kafara is actually, some say, the word cover in English comes from kafara. Kafara meant to cover, because a farmer covers a seed. So a farmer was called a kafir because he covered the seed. It was used for people who knew Islam was true. Not through ignorance, but through arrogance. They said, we will not follow it. They were covering their faith knowingly. How can you cover a seed that doesn't exist? That's where mercy comes from. That's where you say in your du'as that, Ya Allah, every human being on earth, give him the highest paradise. And you have no exceptions. You say, not that one dictator. No, I want them to stop being a dictator. I don't want them to go to paradise for killing innocent Syrians. But I also don't make a status message saying, I want Bashar al-Assad to die and go to the deepest hell. And then when I say to them, well, the Prophet ﷺ used to make a dua for Abu Jahl, and Musa Islam wanted Pharaoh to become Muslim, and there were prophets that used to give dawah to shaitan. The response is, Bashar al-Assad is worse than shaitan, Pharaoh, and Abu Jahl together. And I just look at him and say, okay, so you're biased, let's just end this conversation. So you want vengeance? He says, we want justice. Okay, so what if Allah has justice with you? Allah says, the hadith is, Allah will not show mercy to a people who are not merciful. So you want the same retribution? Okay. So let everyone that's evil go to hell. But let's take it a step further. Let's not have love. Let's have the sun only rise for the people who spend the whole night praying. How many of us will see the sun in the morning? No, but God gives the sun to everyone. Khalil Gibran says in the Prophet, you want to withhold your little cup from people? The river doesn't do so. The river, they can drink from the river of life and they can't drink from your little cup. God still gives them oxygen. Those very same people we're talking about. God still gives them ability. God still wakes them up in the morning. And every night when you go to sleep, we say, Bismika Allahumma amutu wa ahya wa ilayhi nushur. In your name, O Allah. These are heart, love-centric faith. We usually feel stuff. We don't just say stuff. Bismika Allahumma amutu wa ahya wa ilayhi nushur means, in your name, O Allah, I die, I live, and to you is my return. We wake up and we say, Alhamdulillah alladhi ahyana ba'da ma matana wa ilayhi nushur. Praise be to God who gave me life after death, and to him is my return. The scholars say the reason we talk about death when you go to sleep, and we talk about resurrection when we wake up, is that's what sleep is. The soul leaves the body and is returned. Every night we're dying. Every morning we're resurrecting. So if we are conscious of our death in our life every night and morning, then the formal death is just that. It's just one more formality. It's one more death. Like Cornel West said about Malcolm and Martin. They had already died years before the bullets completed the formality. Then the day of judgment is just one more resurrection. It's the major one, but we've been having minor ones every day. And if people are being resurrected, Allah is choosing to put the soul back in their body, how do we know that that person is not Umar on the day that he was going to kill the Prophet ﷺ and became a believer? Every time we meet someone who is wretched and a tyrant, and now much less someone in the masjid that we have a disagreement on our board opinion, and we demonize them, the worst human being we could look at and say, maybe this is which of these human beings is going out to physically kill the Prophet ﷺ? The worst human being, we look at them and we say, this is the day that Umar comes to Islam. And if they don't, the next day we see them again, this is the day that this person becomes better than me. We're uncomfortable with that. Because there's a fundamental lack of love. We don't actually want that. We covet the limited real estate close to God. We don't want the neighborhood of heaven to get crowded. Love will transform. And not this like very pacifistic, I'm talking about a love. Khalid bin Walid had love when he went into battle. I'm talking about love. Don't confuse that with some type of because when you live in a world that's obsessed with the mind, they will also give you a very flimsy love so you don't believe in it. They will give you a love like, I love John Lennon, but flower power is not the only type of love. Love means that if you love someone, you want to stop them from oppression. And sometimes that means you march into battle against them. It's a different type of love. It's revolutionary love. Frederick Douglass was filled with that love. Martin Luther King was filled with that love. Nelson Mandela was filled with that love. It's not the love of, it's a love for your people that means you will die for your people. And you will do whatever it takes for your people within law, within the structure. That type of love is the love we need. And that type of love will heal us. That type of love will take away the profound loneliness. I travel around the country so much, I've seen the number one challenge our people are facing is this loneliness. I actually wrote a song about it called Death of Casanova, and the chorus of it is, cold whisper of wind, because we all wear these disguises, we have these fronts. We all act like we're doing better than we're doing. Because we know the people around us, when they say, how are you, they're not looking for an answer. They were looking for, alhamdulillah, I'm well, how are you? Alhamdulillah, I'm well, okay, inshallah. So, okay, you didn't have a conversation, you just got some dhikr points. You get what I'm saying? You got some good deeds, but you didn't actually answer the question. Alhamdulillah, I'm well is the beginning of Surah Fatiha, and that's good. Everything should be attributed to the praise of God, fine. But I asked you how you are. So it's like in English, if you say, can you ask me how I am?
How are you?
All praise in the world is actually attributed to God. I walk away, and you're like, what the freak? That's a great spiritual insight. It's a good aqidah point, but I still don't know how the dude's doing. It's not real. It's symbolic. Assalamu alaikum is symbolic. Assalamu alaikum means peace be over you. The second meaning is may Allah be over you. Assalamu alaikum. It's a dua. So are we actually saying, when you look at someone, are you asking Allah to put peace over them so that then the angels will put peace over you? If you say assalamu alaikum, you don't feel peaceful afterwards, you didn't do it. Because if you make dua for someone, the angels will make dua for you. So if you truly put peace on someone, the angels will put peace over you. So if every assalamu alaikum is not this like rain of peace, then we're not doing it. Love is and when you see this loneliness and you see that people are resorting to social media, people are writing statuses to get likes so that they think people are looking at them. People are tweeting so they can get retweeted. People put pictures up and delete them if no one likes it. This world is extremely troubling to me, and I'm very worried about it. I'm serious. And the more you become somewhat of a public figure, that's why I deleted my Facebook thing and I went back to like friends with 300 people on my page. Because I was so tired of this like spotlight that was not a pedestal of respect, it was a pedestal of loneliness. And I saw people literally faking their state. And so the song I wrote, I had that in there in the chorus. It says, cold whispers of wind blow through disguises into darkened places where memories hide. And after the passion, the highs and the lows, people carry shadows that nobody shows. Cold whispers of wind blow through disguises into darkened places where memories hide. After the passion, the highs and the lows, people carry shadows that nobody shows. And if we could see the shadows that each we carry, no one would be mean to anyone. We'd just have mercy. You see someone being rude to you, and if you knew the pain that they went through that led to them to have that moment of rudeness, you would accept it. Because you would know for every time they've exhaled anything mean, they've inhaled 1,000 breaths of pain. And we would be easier with people. We'd be light with people. Why was the Prophet so merciful? Because he had profound love. The well of love, from the well of love comes the bucket of mercy. And we need that love. We deeply need it. We need to care for people. We have to care, and not with any label. Oh, we have to care for Muslims because they're our first concentric circle of responsibility. No. Sorry. Family, neighbors. Neighbors are not defined by religion. And Imam Nawawi, it's not someone random. Imam Nawawi, the one who compiled the 40 hadith, said, the hadith, لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لأخيه ما يحب لنفسه. None of you truly believes until you love for your brother what you love for yourself. He said, brother there is not brother in faith, it's brother in humanity. That's Imam Nawawi saying that. And he didn't say like, he didn't say prefer. All these translations are wrong. Hub, love. You gotta love people of other faiths. Love sensitizes us to normal experiences. I've mentioned this a lot in the last few weeks, but there's something that happened to me. I was in Allentown. I went to a grocery store, and I'm sure this happened to you guys too. There's like a 72, 73-year-old old lady, this Caucasian lady, and she was like bagging groceries for me. and she had arthritis and her hand was really shaking. She couldn't do it. She kept apologizing. I tried to help her. She's like, no, I got it. And she had really blue eyes, and my grandmother had blue eyes. And I looked at her, and my grandmother just passed away a few years ago, and I looked at her, Allah yarhamah, and I looked at her and I saw my grandmother. I said, what would I do if my grandmother was bagging groceries for this 30-year-old guy? My heart broke. I literally had a spiritual experience. I looked in her eyes, and I said something, so I won't repeat, and she got really emotional. I got more out of that than all these halakats and conferences and RSs, zaytunas and al-magras and bayinas and isnas. Because I was present in that moment with that woman. My love for her healed me. They say when you love for the sake of God, what it means is your love goes up to heaven and it rains down back upon your own heart. That's the water cycle of love. It will come back to you. It will enrich the soil. It will make those roots strong so the branches become merciful. And when the branches are merciful, when the winds of time hit upon it, they will bend. They won't break. We will be able to get through the winds of this life. We'll be like the sailboat that will go whichever way God wants them to go. And they will not be capsized. They will not fall apart. They will not be shipwrecked souls on these lonely islands. This all happens when our life is predicated and rooted in love. Love is a powerful emotion. Love is a transformative emotion. Love is not fluffy. And we have a very serious lack of love in this world. And I'll give an example. Carl Jung, the great psychologist, he has this thing called anima and animus, and this idea of men and women, the reason they love each other. And he has this really interesting idea about how most of us have never actually loved anyone before. We've been in love, but we've never loved anyone. You say, what's the difference? Semantics. No, we've been in love with ourselves. And the other person was just a helpful accessory to our love of ourselves. How? So I've been in love 1.5 times, and it wasn't like the second person was like half a person or anything. But anyways, it's a long story. When you love someone else, it's very different to, okay, so I love myself, right? That person loves me. We have a lot in common. We agree. I think I'm amazing. She thinks I'm amazing. God, I love her for her ability to love me. That's not love. And you can tell it's not love when they leave you. Because if it was ownership, if you love their ability to love you, as soon as they stop loving you, you hate them. Because now you have nothing in common. I love me, she no longer loves me. I hate her. If I loved her selflessly, then what does her love for me have anything to do with it? That's the proof. You actually prove your love when she leaves. And people show their colors when it ends. You realize it was narcissism. You realize it was an elaborate ploy of self-love. And the other person was very helpful because you got tired of just having to love yourself alone. So you wanted some company. That's not love. That's individualism painted in love. You're not romantic for them. You're using them for their body and then you love them for the way they love you. That's not love though. Sorry, it's not love. And for us to love other people we don't know. We are people who fall in love quickly. Doesn't mean, I'm not talking about romantic, I'm saying we fall in love quickly. People say you shouldn't fall quickly. We do sujood. We are people who fall quickly. But doesn't mean that we're oversensitive, we break our hearts. No. It's a mature type of love. That I love that woman from the grocery store. I love her. I don't like her. How can I want for her what I want for myself? How can I love for her what I would love for myself if I don't love her? We are people that love quick. Now, does it mean we fall in love romantically with every person we meet? That's a whole other thing. That's not what we're talking about. And the fact that love always takes us in that direction means we don't love enough. The fact that our first thought when we talk about love is romantic love means that we're thinking more carnal. Why should that be the first association of love? No, I'm not saying that you go to a guy, goes to a Muslim girl and says, I love you. That will be misconstrued. And that may not be appropriate. But you can love someone else. And not romantically, not for marriage, you love them, you care. It's not, somebody comes to Islam, I respect you and I don't even know what you're going through. That fake modesty makes everyone islands. And we live that life because we want to be accepted as good people. But we're not really looking for the person next to us and see, are they okay? I was in Jordan, this Muslim scholar there, who doesn't know the context of America, but is very famous. He's not Sheikh Noor or someone, he was someone that was just visiting. I don't want to get any misunderstandings. He wrote a fatwa on this really popular Muslim website. He says, if you're on a college campus in America, and there's a reason if you don't live in a country, you're not supposed to make fatwas for that country. He says, if you say salam to someone of the opposite gender, is strongly disliked. And that's like makruh. I was like, homie, you don't know what we're going through. It's not even, and here's talking about Muslims. We should be on college campuses, making sure that when people are coming back from the club, they're okay. And this is our deen. This is where love comes in. This is where people, there's this whole culture in college that you're not supposed to tell people what they're doing is wrong because that's judging. Who are you to judge me? You're not better than me, all that culture. And that's actually extremely problematic because it creates this moral relativism where no one can even give sincere advice because that means self-righteousness. And that's actually false. These are the things that we're not able to deconstruct in our community because we don't have enough people thinking about it. We just kind of buy into it. And the Muslim speakers will say, don't judge people, and then the people will clap. They don't realize that means don't give advice to people. Okay? But here's the nuance. Because the other side of it is you do tell people they're wrong and you think they're better than them. There's two overreactions. So on one hand, you tell everyone they're wrong because you think you're better. On the other hand, you don't tell anyone anything. You say, no, because I trust them, I haven't given them advice. And then like this girl came to me and she had been with this abusive boyfriend for like 4 years. And he was of Catholic faith, she was of Muslim faith. And she was MSA vice president of her MSA, and she was really involved in all this stuff. And she was asking me for advice. I said, why haven't your friends given you advice? They say, oh, they trust me too much. What? Dude, if I'm going off a cliff, you're on the highway, and you don't tell me you're going off a cliff because you don't want to judge me, that's a problem. No, I don't think I'm better than you, but right now I'm driving a little better than you. And you're going off a cliff. Now, the other side, this is where love comes in. This is where love, I'm just giving examples of how love transforms our whole paradigm. You will tell that person when they're drinking alcohol in a nice way, privately, with adab, all those things. You will tell them that what you're doing is going to harm you. However, here's where love comes in. It's not self-righteous. This is where love comes in. In the moment that the alcohol is touching their lips, you still believe they're better. I'm not saying later you believe, oh, maybe they'll change. No. This is why it's so powerful. As the alcohol is going into their mouth, as you're giving them advice, you say, this person is better than me, but because they're better than me, I love them, and because I love them, I want what's best for them, so I'm going to give them good advice. And I will still, not symbolically, oh, I think you're a better person, but no, you actually believe they're better than you. In the moment you see them do something wrong, and you still advise them out of a sincere heart. The love is not a... Love will be infused into everything we do, will be infused into every action. And that's when it's transformative. And that is sorely what's needed in a world where people are becoming more and more isolationist. You go in a subway now, and everyone's on their cell phones. You go in neighborhoods, and it's graveyards. There's no kids outside. That Harvard professor, she was saying that in the 70s, when the plane would land, everyone would have their cigarettes ready, and they would say as soon as the plane landed, because you couldn't smoke in the air, you could smoke on the ground. As soon as the plane would land, they would say you're free to light up your cigarettes. They would light up their cigarettes. And now we have our new cigarette. Right? And as soon as the wheels touch the ground, everyone has it, and they're shaking. They got to get their fix. And then as soon as the plane lands, they let us light it up. We got, and love. Love will make that person next to you not just a co-inhabitant of the seat. They will become a human being. And their story will become important to us. We won't be there to give dawah. All these phrases don't make sense. We'll be there to love them. And if we heal their heart and they heal their heart, who knows where their heart will go. But we won't be there, our deen, we won't be nice to someone as a marketing mechanism to finally sell them the product of Islam. We will stop thinking of our faith in corporate terms. We will start thinking in the flavor of love. And here's I'll end with the story. I'm sorry, I went way over, but Dawood Hornsby has that great story of the old one. He's the song about the Prophet ﷺ going out with the old woman, and he's helping her, and she hates the Prophet. This is from the book, the Encyclopedia of the Seerah. And at the end of the journey, he's turning to leave, and then she says, who are you, by the way? She's been hating on him. She's leaving Makkah to get away from him. He says, I'm Muhammad. And she gets surprised, and she realizes the Prophet ﷺ, and she breaks down crying, and she ends up joining his message. I won't say convert to Islam, because all that language is starting to become uncomfortable to me. She joins his verbal path to God. She joins his flock that's flying to the Creator. And then he leaves. And she comes back with him. Now here's what's interesting though. One, she's dissing him, and it's not the way we react to Islamophobia. Fire with fire. He's reacting with love. He's taking care of the person who is dissing him. And then, here's what's interesting. He didn't do a gotcha moment at the end. Listen to the story carefully. He didn't say in the end, oh, by the way, before you leave, I am Muhammad. He was turning to leave. She would have left still hating on him and never known that was him. Why was he okay with that? If his purpose was to convert everyone by any means necessary, wouldn't he have been obliged to say, I am Muhammad? No, because he knew the verse of the Quran, Oh Muhammad, you may kill yourself with worry, these people may not believe. If I had wanted, I would have sent down a sign from the heaven and they would have all believed. And Sidi Sham was saying, Baqi on nafs here, his love for his people was so strong. Baqi on nafs means like when you kill an animal, you kill it for the jugular vein, right, as quickly as possible. Baqi on nafs actually means you kill it from the spine, the most painful way possible. That's the verb that's being used to describe the emotional, psychological state of the Prophet because his people were not becoming Muslim or joining his verbal path to God. He was like standing at the brink of hell and they were pushing him to get in and he couldn't take it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, it's not on you, it's on me. What, we're not on a team? If I wanted, I would send them a sign and they all believe. So why haven't I done that? You work for me, right? Your boss can make them all Muslim in a second. So why are you stressing? Because if I want it, I'll do it. It's not on you. There's a point here. He had that training. So he realized that his mission was to be good. His mission was not to be a proselytizing, overbearing, religious zealot. And in that moment, he was turning away from a woman who was dissing him, his Lord, and his path. And he was not going to say anything. And then she turned and says, by the way, what's your name? And then he said his name. And then her life transformed. This is love. Only love will do that. Intrinsic love. Not love because maybe someday you'll become because if we don't have love for a Muslim, we may doubt our Islam. If we don't have love for a human, we have to doubt our humanity itself. And what's worse? So we'll end with Surah Asr for my talk, and then if there's time for discussion, we can. I'm sorry I went a little over. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Wal Asr. Inna lisana lafi khusr. Alladhina amanu wa amilu salihat. Wa tawassaw bil haqqi wa tawassaw bis sabr. Wal Asr. Asra by the squeezing time. And some people that could mean the past and the future because we're obsessed with the anxiety and the depression from our past. When we're in the moment, there is no squeezing time. The past and the future disappear and we become present in the present. Wal Asr, by the squeezing time. Inna linsana lafi khusr. Like asir is juice, right? So squeezing, like fruits are squeezed, we're being squeezed by time until we release our anxiety and our sadness. Inna linsana lafi khusr. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the singular, and a lot of us are in this state where He says, verily man is in loss, but it means mankind, all mankind. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't use the word nas, plural. He uses it singular insan to show us that when we're in loss, we're going to feel like a lonely little human being. We won't feel like we're in a group. You know, Biggie Smalls had that song that when I die, I want to go to hell. I don't want to go to heaven with the goody-goodies dressed in white. I like black Tims and black hoodies. It's not Cafe Inferno. You're not going to feel like, or Billy Joel has that line, I'd rather laugh with the sinners than cry with the saints. The sinners are much more fun. It's not like that, though. I like both songs, but it's not like that. You're not going to be in heaven. It's not going to be like pyro and all these people are having fun. And it's like, you know, like, what's that, the Man on Fire thing in Las Vegas where everyone's like burning the thing. It's not going to be fun. You're going to feel lonely. And a lot of our loneliness is because we live in the shadow away from God's light. And one of our teachers, Sheikh Qasim in Seattle, he said when he was actually a really successful college football player, he was playing the Rose Bowl and everything, and he said that when he goes by clubs, he says, I look into the club, and he says, you know what people are in the club for, what they're looking for? People said drugs. He said, no, they're looking for God. They just don't know it. That hole in the heart can only be filled by that light. And when we're away from God's light, our whole life are just different shades of shadow. And when we're in Allah's light, it's like nur ala nur. What the meanings of nur ala nur is that the shadow of God's light is light intensified. His light actually brings light, not darkness. And the Prophet ﷺ was the greatest shadow of his light, and even he did not have a shadow. The Prophet ﷺ was such a beautiful force to the people around him of mercy that he couldn't even create a physical shadow. He could not be the cause of any darkness, even if it was a physical shadow. When we're in loss, we're going to feel lonely. But when he's talking about people that are with Allah, he uses the plural. It doesn't even match insan and alladina, but it's actually a rhetorical tool to show that the people who are with Allah, they'll always feel like they're in a group, even when they think they're alone. Because to say you're lonely is to say you're alone. And if you're alone, then where's God? Where are the angels that surround you? The two guardian angels. How would our lives be if we treated every human being like someone that was deserving of two angels to follow them around their whole life? If you went to a corporation, you saw someone had a secretary, and the secretary did everything for them, you say, oh, that's a big shot. And when they went home, they had a butler who did everything for them, you say, that's a big shot. What about a human being that was given two angelic beings of light to follow them for their entire life? I think they're worthy of a little bit of kindness from us. Doesn't matter. You're Nicki Minaj, you have two beings of light, and she has it. Doesn't matter what she's going through. You're Lamar Odom, people are hating on him. You don't know what he's going to come out of that with. He could be the greatest saint on earth of the Muslim tradition. We don't know. This is our deen. We don't know. He has been given, even in the moment when he was in that brothel, he had two beings of light that were still assigned to him. And that light could be his salvation, it could be his baptism, it could be his purification. إِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, they believe. That has to be done even if you're by yourself. The first two have to be done individually, like Ibrahim when he was the ummah unto himself. Even if you're an island within the great oceans of disbelief, you have to be that island. إِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. They believe, not then they do righteous deeds. Wa means it has to be done at the same time. Because the problem of shaitan was that he believed. He's actually the greatest believer. He spoke to God. He's angry at God. If he's not a believer, who is he angry at? Who told him to bow down to Adam? His issue is not belief. He didn't do that righteous deed. It's not thumma, it's not later. Wa amilu salihat. And the last two, this is why we have things like this. And this is why Medina is so important. Medina, the city was so important, and the Medina we're trying to create here. The sunnah is not just doing what happened inside of Medina. It's building Medina itself. And building Medina is the biggest forgotten sunnah. So of course everything's in chaos. We never built Medina. So these things are important. Wa tawasaw. Tawasaw in Arabic is from tafa'ala, to be done together. Tawasaw is also, as our teacher Sheikh Faisal Matar said, it's from the same root as wasiya, which is like a will that you write when you're dying. And it means that even at the darkest times, at the moment of death, this is when the believers come together. This deen, like Bruce Springsteen said, he said, my music was written for hard times. This deen was built for hard times. This is when the believer, this is where our deen is the most, it comes alive. The greater the darkness, the brighter the lights. The brighter the stars. Polaris shines brightest when everything else goes to black. وَتَوَاسَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاسَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. They come together in haqq, not Islam, not dogma, not theology. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala used the word haqq because truth transcends all labels. And Sheikh Hamza said, I believe in truth. And I will stand, he said, I will stand with truth, haqq. We come together in haqq. It doesn't mean we're just Muslims. Haqq is transcendent. It's an esoteric realm where, anyway. So, وَتَوَاسُوا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاسُوا بِالصَّبْرِ. Sheikh Hamza said, I stand with truth, whether it's with the Muslims or against them. He says the Prophet ﷺ didn't come to build tribes, he came to destroy tribes. وَتَوَاسُوا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاسُوا بِالصَّبْرِ. They come together in truth, and they come together in patience. What's the connection between haqq and sabr? What's the patience between truth and sabr? One, the path of truth will require sabr. Two, you will want the truth outside of God's time, and it will require you have to be within His time. Like Louis Farrakhan, the head of the Nation of Islam said, he said, what time is it? Not in our time, but in God's time. Because if you do the right thing at the wrong time, you may get the wrong results. So we have to have patience. We have to have sabr. And sabr has to be done mutually. وَتَوَاسَوْا. It cannot be done alone. We are here to build community. We're here to love each other and take care of each other. We're not here just to consume information. And if we can build communities of love, this will be transformative. We don't count how many converts come to Islam and then find themselves in a cold community that has no social, there's no carols, there's no social, cultural foundations for them to live in. And yet we put one more tally in the fastest growing religion in the world. That's when you're in Islamism. We create places that are oases. People are loved unconditionally. And this is where we unconditionally, that's what love is so important. Not toleration. We don't say building bridges with the other. Oh, interfaith gathering, we need to build bridges. A bridge implies that you're on two separate sides of the shore. We are not bridge builders, we're lovers. And if you love someone, there is no bridge. So we're not trying to build bridges with the other. We're trying to burn down the bridge and fall in love with them. Okay, so thank you guys all. Sorry, that was a little intense and a little long, but that's okay for listening.
Takbir, Allahu Akbar. Takbir, Allahu Akbar. Inshallah, Jazakallah khair.
Your brother Saad for coming out and spending time, and he had just been talking before.